Welcome to the Healing Horizons with Saima, where science meets spirit in the art of transformation. Today, we are joined by our amazing guest, Dr. Karen Parker, who is the visionary founder of Quantum Human Design, best-selling author, and TEDx speaker, who helps people rewrite their inner narratives and step into authentic sovereignty. So, we will explore how breaking repetitive, limiting stories can unlock resilience, purpose, and true creative power. So, Dr. Karen, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
So, Dr. Karen, let's start with you often say that our stories shape our lives. So, can you share that what first made you realize that how powerfully these narratives can limit limit us?
Absolutely. My understanding of this actually started with my own personal experience. When I turned 40, I discovered a lump in my breast and was diagnosed with breast cancer. Fortunately, it was a very treatable form of breast cancer, and I had caught it very early. But I still ended up obviously going through all of the treatments that you would go through with breast cancer. And one of the treatments that I went through was I had to take a chemotherapy agent called tamoxifen. And the experience that I had on this medication was very difficult and very hard because one of the side effects of tamoxifen is depression. And I'm a person that's never really, before that, never really experienced depression or even dark thoughts. And the experience that I had on this medication was just very dark and very depressing, which I really couldn't afford to experience at that time. I was a full-time single parent at that time. I was raising my four children by myself at that time. Their father was not part of the picture at all. So I was responsible for taking care of my children, for working and earning money to be able to support my children. And I didn't have time to be sick, and I certainly didn't have time to struggle with the depression that I was experiencing. So I ended up really sort of having to sit down and have a serious conversation with myself and a really serious conversation with my body. I had been studying energy psychology and energy psychology principles. I had been studying the idea that your thoughts create your reality for several years at that point in time. And I decided that I really needed to take all these books that I was reading and apply everything that I had been reading to myself. And so I sat down and I asked myself, what is it that my body and this cancer and this darkness, this heaviness, what is it that is actually telling me? If my body was going to tell a story, what story would my body be telling right now? And when I sat and really listened to my body, what my body was telling me was that I was tired. I was absolutely exhausted. And in fact, my body said to me, your breasts are a symbol of nurturing, right? As mothers, we breastfeed our children. It's a place where our children seek comfort when they're little. And to me, there was definitely no nurturing for myself happening in my own life. And so as I began this dialogue with my body and really began to explore my own story, I started to see that my body was telling a story, and it was telling me a story of a woman who really needed to include radical self-care and self-nurturing back into her life, which of course I did at that point, and began healing my own lack of self-nurturing, and eventually made the decision. And this is a personal decision and certainly not anything that I would advocate for anyone. But for me, I made a very personal decision to stop taking the tamoxifen medication and to really begin a radical course of self-nurturing. And I've been cancer free for 20 years, and that certainly changed my life and my level of joy and satisfaction in my life as well.
That's really moving, Karen. It's really powerful that how you turned such a difficult experience into a moment of deep self-awareness. Like listening to your body's story instead of, pushing through takes a lot of courage. And what you shared really highlights how those moments of struggle can actually become the beginning of a new kind of understanding about ourselves. And that's really a powerful reflection.
Thank you. Well, I think it was a very, very powerful reflection for me. And I think in the meantime, especially in the last 10 years, we've seen a lot of research now on the relationship between the stories we tell and our physical health and wellness. And I would even say that there's a relationship between not only the stories we tell about who we are and how we are, what we deserve, what we're worthy of, and our bodies, but even a relationship between the stories we tell and our relationship with money, and the stories we tell and our relationships and our friendships and our community relationships. There's a relationship between our stories and our work fulfillment. There's a relationship between the stories we tell and even our spiritual connection. So those that story that you tell about yourself becomes a fundamentally creative source of what you experience in your life.
I completely agree with that, and that's such an eye opener, yes. Now, you connect the hero's journey to human design. So, how do those two frameworks work together in helping people transform?
So, human design is a system that is a synthesis of Eastern and Western astrology, the Chinese I Ching, the Hindu chakra system, Judaic Kabbalah, and quantum physics. Basically, using your birthday, birth time, and birthplace, you enter your information into a computer program, and it gives you a map of how you are uniquely configured. That map, that human design map, is really a configuration for your unique, authentic story. And when we start to look at that story and take back control of that story, and this human design system is really just a synthesis of ancient and modern archetypes, right? It's just a blend of different parts of the stories from different esoteric systems. Some of them, as you know, very, very ancient esoteric systems, and some more modern systems. These parts of the story that represent your own unique configuration are a really powerful way to help you systematically begin to look at what story are you telling. The hero's journey, if we make the hero's journey very, very simple, the hero's journey is basically a format for pretty much any story we tell. Most stories, when we tell a story or we read a book or we listen to a story, it starts off with the main character. And then the beginning of the story, the main character is not very mature. They're not very grown up. They're oftentimes struggling with parts of their personality that maybe aren't working to their advantage. And in the story, they go through some kind of a transformation. They go on some kind of a quest. They have to confront some part of themselves. They have to confront some inner place where they have to push and become mature and deepen their connection to their authentic self. And as they go through this challenge, they come out the other end transformed into a mature and wise person who is able then to come back into their society or their community and make some kind of meaningful contribution. In human design, if we kind of lay human design on top of the hero's journey, your human design chart is a really powerful way to begin to explore who is the hero or who is the main character in your story. So for many of us, when we get confronted with challenges, so let's say we have a health challenge, or we have a challenge with money, or we have a challenge in our relationships, I can say to you, okay, your story is part of what's creating your life, right? You've got something going on in your story that's keeping you stuck or that's holding you back, something that's limiting you. Well, that's a nice piece of information. But if I want to get into my story and really start to look at, well, what part of my story is stuck or blocked, or maybe what part of my story is limited, it's very difficult to know what part of the story is actually creating the problem. Human design gives us a very systematic way to start looking at the story of your main character and analyzing that story layer after layer after layer so that you can begin to very intentionally take back control over the story you tell about who you are and how you are. And you do it basically guided by this map, your human design chart. So your human design chart sort of becomes this map that helps you systematically explore what parts of your story belong to you, what parts of your story are parts that you learned from the world outside of you that maybe don't fit you anymore. What parts of your story do you need to rewrite so that you can reclaim the hero in your story and emerge transformed and ready to share your gifts with the world?
Mhm. I really appreciate and that how you bring those two ideas together. It really shows that how transformation isn't just about external change, but about understanding the deeper patterns guiding us. And I would say that the way you describe it really makes the journey feel more intentional. Like we are not just moving through challenges, but actually uncovering who we are meant to be along the way. And that's such an insightful way to look at it.
Thank you for that. And I would say it's really kind of an exciting time in the field of narrative psychology, because part of what we're seeing in this field is that when we begin to approach our personal story, our life story as a hero's journey, it gives us the power to transcend those events that can stop us short. We're all going to have events in our lives that are challenging. We're all going to have some kind of loss, some kind of unexpected change. We're going to experience things that cause us to question ourselves. And oftentimes, what happens for many of us is when we go through a loss, or we go through something that triggers grief, or we have an unexpected event that happens, we get stuck in the event. We start to identify with the crisis or the disruption or the pain or the disease or the heartbreak. And we stop our story in that really hard place. And that, in a way, when we stop our story in that place, and that's the part we like to stop our story, right? Unconsciously. I'm not saying we like to do it consciously, but unconsciously, that's the interesting part of the story, right? When we go out with friends and we sit at the coffee shop, or we catch up after we haven't seen our friends in a long time, that's the part of the story we love to tell. It's dramatic, it's painful, it brings a certain interesting factor into our conversation. But if you stop the story there, it's kind of like ending a book in the middle of a chapter. We don't often talk about what happens after we experience trauma, or what happens after we have a difficult event. We're very fixated on the idea of post traumatic stress, but we don't always talk about post traumatic growth. And when we start looking at our lives as this adventure, and this adventure where our main character is going to go through these cycles and seasons of disruption. And these cycles and seasons of disruptions are not places where we stop the story. They're places where the story gets catalyzed, where the experience becomes the fertile ground for our growth and our transformation. We know from research that if we start seeing our story through that lens, and we begin to really look at our lives as an adventure, and we start to recognize that when we get challenged, it's not something that is supposed to break us, it's something that's supposed to help us grow. We actually can become more resilient. We can actually begin to reinterpret challenge and the experience of challenge or pain or trauma in our life, and use it to our advantage. Use it as an opportunity to shift our perspective a little bit and begin to see it as a growth edge and a growth point, and not a place where we get stopped, but where we get stuck, or we get oppressed by our own mindset.
Absolutely, 100%. That completely makes sense. Yes. So, do you think that people underestimate their own heroic moments in everyday life?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I wish, I always wish, because when you hear other people's stories and you see their charts, and you see their human design chart, and you see how much potential lives in every person, and then you hear the stories that they tell, and sometimes you'll hear that the story that they're telling, or the story they're stuck in, is so limiting. And you think, how can this person that has this much potential and this much power and this much possibility, trap themselves in this teeny tiny little story? So yes, there's often dissonance between the stories we tell and and the capacity that we have to really fulfill a different potential.
Mhm. That that's like yes, that's a great point. And yes, as you said, like it's so true that we often overlook the strength that it takes just, to show up every day, especially when life feels heavy. And I really like that how you highlight that those small everyday moments of courage are just as, heroic as the big dramatic ones we tend to celebrate. It's like a beautiful reminder that we are all living our own version of the hero's journey.
Yeah.
So now our world, runs on constant comparison for sure. So, how can understanding one's unique design shift that cycle of inadequacy?
I think when we understand our chart, if we use our chart as a blueprint for what's possible, right? If you look at your chart and you can see, okay, this is a collection of different archetypes that are part of my soul curriculum, because I like to think of the chart as being your soul curriculum. And you look at that chart and you start to look at all these different parts and pieces. It's not a labeling system. And I think that's a really important piece to understand. And really, honestly, I think if we look at any personality assessment system, whether it's traditional astrology, whether it's Enneagram, whether it's Myers-Briggs, we have a tendency to look at these systems, including human design. I think there are people even who look at human design as a system, as a way of labeling ourselves. I am a this, right? I am an EFMJ. I am a 5. I am a in human design, we say, I am a manifester type, right? We put labels on ourselves. And what we have to really understand when we take a step back, particularly when we look at human design and we look at the idea of archetypes are just parts of a story. And stories are not static, they're dynamic. And when we start to look at a chart as an outline for the potential of who you can grow into becoming, instead of a system where you label yourself and consequently sort of rationalize and justify keeping yourself small, when you start to realize that you are a story that is made of all kinds of parts, and all of those parts of a story can show up in your life on a spectrum. And sometimes they're going to show up. Those parts of who you are will show up on the shadow side. We don't all have perfect days all the time, right? We all have cycles and seasons where sometimes the shadow of who we are shows up. But when you can really sort of see, okay, right now I'm in a phase where I'm really living out the shadow part of myself, then you can start to understand that, okay, I'm not stuck here. This isn't my label. I'm not, I'm not going to always be stuck in this dark part of my chart. I can take this information, I can take this understanding of right now, I'm really feeling like a hermit that wants to go hide in the woods, and recognize that there's a message there for me. What my chart or what my experience is telling me is right now I need some time alone to restock, replenish, integrate what I need to integrate, but that I don't always have to stay out here lost in the woods. I can take this part of who I am, and with time and with healing and with integration, I can take that same hermit energy and go back out into the world with the awareness that I'm a person who needs to retreat and take care of myself. So your chart isn't a label. It illuminates the full spectrum of who you could be and how you can use that understanding to grow and evolve your story.
Yes, I really feel that, Karen. Like once we start understanding our own design, it kind of breaks that habit of comparing ourselves to others. And like we start seeing our strengths differently, not as better or worse, just yours. Yes, that's such a freeing perspective according to me too. So have you witnessed a transformation where someone's chart completely reframed their sense of purpose?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I would say, honestly, I see that pretty much every day. I think my maybe my most favorite experience is I was literally just talking about this with my students this morning. One of my very favorite readings, I did a reading for a woman who was 72 years old at the time. And after we looked at her chart and we talked about her story and all the parts of her chart, she looked at me and she started to cry. And she said, I feel like for the very first time in my life, I have been seen. And I now have permission to live my life as the person I was born to be. And I love that experience for her so much, because I think it was so profound for her to really feel so seen. But it also kind of broke my heart a little bit, because I think how tragic that she had to wait 72 years to feel seen. And so, it's my biggest prayer and hope that people can begin to people can grow up feeling seen from the very start, ideally. And certainly that experience that she had of feeling seen for the first time, she took that experience, and for the next 10 years until she passed, she just led a dramatically different life, where she was so quietly and honestly authentic and spoke her truth, and really stopped tolerating a lot of circumstances and situations in her lives, including some relationships that were really hurtful for her. She learned to stand up for herself and to really value herself and the beauty of her story.
That's really like wonderful to hear, Karen. It's amazing, that how understanding something as personal as a chart can completely shift the way something like someone sees their life and purpose. And I love that you have witnessed that kind of deep transformation firsthand.
Thank you.
So, if someone listening feels trapped in a repetitive story, where's the first place to begin disrupting that pattern?
So I would say one of the first places that you can begin is, first of all, start cataloging your own story and break it down. Start asking yourself, what is the story that I'm telling about my relationship with money? What is the story that I'm telling about my relationship with my beloved, with my friends, with my family, with my coworkers? What is the story that I have about my body and its capacity and its power and its strength and its health and vitality? What story am I telling about my creativity and my lifestyle? What story am I telling about even my connection to God or to source or to my spiritual connection? You can begin first just very simply taking an analysis and taking a step-by-step exploration of where is your story showing up in your life. The second thing that I would recommend is get a human design chart. You can get a human design chart at freehumandesignchart.com and run your chart and look at your chart, because that chart is going to, in our system, the charts come with a really lovely free report. That's going to start giving you the foundation to then begin to systematically explore your personal story so that you can start looking at, let's say, if you're struggling with money, and let's say if you're struggling with money because you are not charging what you're worth and you are compromising on your value. Well, if you go back to your chart, you might find that that story about your own worth lives in your chart. And that chart's going to give you information, important information on how do you need to maybe start changing that story and changing your definition of your value so that you can cultivate a better relationship with money. That's a simple place to start. And of course, if you want to go even deeper, I encourage you to get my book, Quantum Wellness, which walks you through a very systematic approach to analyzing that chart and looking at your story.
I absolutely love that, Karen. It's such a grounded way to start, like explain, just pausing to ask ourselves this fundamental questions about our body, creativity, and connection to something bigger, like explain. And pairing that reflection with a human design chart really gives people a concrete tool to see patterns they might not even realize they're repeating. And it's really a powerful combination. Self-inquiry paired with insight that can help someone for sure, to start stepping out of those old stories and into a more intentional way of living. And you have broke that down in a beautiful way.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I think that it doesn't have to be hard. I think that's the piece we really have to keep reminding ourselves that literally the process of rewriting your story can be as simple as sitting down, getting a pen, and writing the story as it is right now, and then taking yourself on an imaginary journey and rewriting that story how you would like for it to be. Just sitting down and writing it out and seeing it in front of you and consciously recrafting that story from a creative perspective allows you to begin to make changes in the brain and the body pretty darn quickly.
I completely agree. Yes. So, is there a daily practice that anchors people in truth rather than old conditioning?
There are so many, but I would say, um, I'm a big fan of meditation, and I certainly would say spend some time every day disconnected from all the noise of our regular life and go connect with nature and go connect with yourself. And you can do that by sitting and meditating or even just simply going outside and walking. I think one of the most important things we have to do for ourselves right now, especially at this time in the world and this time when I think we're so inundated with technology and noise, there's just so much noise, is we have to unplug and get reconnected back with ourselves, with our bodies, with stillness, and with the rhythm and the gifts and the beauty of nature.
Absolutely, Karen. And I completely resonate with that. Like meditation and spending time in nature are really like such grounding practices. There's something, about slowing down, listening, and just being present that really helps us reconnect with our own truth instead of getting caught up in old patterns. And I love that you bring your own experience into that. It really makes it so relatable and inspiring for anyone listening out there. So that was really an illuminating journey with you, Dr. Karen. You reminded us that the story we tell ourselves shapes the world we live in, and the moment we choose a new one, everything shifts. So, listeners, to explore your own blueprint, dive into quantum human design and start living the narrative of wholeness, courage, and freedom. Until next time, keep expanding your horizon and remember, your life is the greatest story ever told.